The night had been unusually calm, almost too quiet for my liking. It was a still evening in Macon, Georgia, where everyone knew each other, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. I was sitting in my dimly lit living room, the only light coming from the soft glow of the floor lamp beside my armchair. My notebook was open in my lap, filled with half-finished thoughts and scribbles. I had been lost in my own world, trying to make sense of things, when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, 10:15 p.m. Far too late for a visit, especially in a small town like Macon. My partner, Sophie, hadn't come home before midnight in months. So, I knew it wasn't her. A weight of exhaustion settled over me. This wasn't just from work, but from a life slowly coming undone. I made my way to the door, flicking on the outdoor and hallway lights. As I peered through the peephole, my heart skipped a beat. There were 2 police officers standing on my porch. The pit in my stomach deepened. Cops at this hour never meant good news. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. What did I do this time? I tried to joke, though my voice cracked. The taller officer, a man in his late 40s with a grim expression, spoke first. "Are you Sarah Williams?" "Yes," I replied, trying to steady myself. "Is your partner Sophie Williams?" "Yes," I said again, now feeling a lump form in my throat. "What is this about?" The 2 officers exchanged a quick glance. The younger one, likely fresh from the academy, shifted nervously. "Sophie's been hurt tonight," the older officer said bluntly. "She's been taken to Macon General Hospital." My chest tightened instantly. "Hurt? How? Is she?" I couldn't bring myself to finish. The older officer hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "She's in surgery. They're doing everything they can." I leaned against the doorframe, my mind racing. Sophie, my partner for the last 8 years, the one I thought I could trust more than anyone, was fighting for her life. But I had no clue why. "Can you tell me what happened?" I whispered, my voice shaky. The younger officer spoke up, his voice quieter. "Sophie was found in a motel room with another woman. The woman's partner showed up, and she had a gun." I stared at them, unable to process their words. Sophie had been caught up in some sort of affair by another woman whose partner was now involved in this mess. It all felt like an out-of-body experience. "Is the other woman?" I started to ask, but the older officer cut me off. "She's dead. The woman shot the other woman, and then she shot Sophie. Sophie's lucky to be alive." I swallowed hard. The enormity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. Sophie had cheated on me. And now, she was in a hospital bed, fighting for her life because of it. Part of me was devastated. Another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, felt an icy rage surge through me. "Do you know who the other woman was?" I managed to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. The older officer nodded. "Her name is Megan Carter. She's in custody. She confessed to everything." I nodded, feeling numb. Megan Carter. The name meant nothing to me at first, but now I understood that she had meant something to Sophie. "We need to ask you a few questions," the younger officer said, pulling out a small notepad. "Where were you tonight?" I crossed my arms, feeling anger well up inside me. "I've been here. Alone. Working. If you think I'm involved in this, you're wrong. I didn't even know about the affair until tonight." They exchanged another look, and the older officer gave a brief nod. "We'll verify that, but for now, we'll take your word. We'll contact you if we have further questions." They turned to leave, but I stopped them. "Wait. Is there anything else I need to know?" The older officer paused, his expression softening slightly. "Your partner's condition is critical, but the doctors are hopeful. You might want to get to the hospital." I nodded, though a part of me, an angry, betrayed part, didn't want to go. But duty called. I grabbed my keys and jacket, heading out into the night. The streets of Macon were eerily quiet as I drove to the hospital. The fluorescent lights in the lobby buzzed faintly, and the nurse at the front desk immediately recognized me. "Ms. Williams, your partner is still in surgery. The doctor will be out to speak with you soon." I took a seat, my mind spinning. I thought of Sophie, of everything we'd been through, the promises we'd made, the life we'd tried to build together. 2 months ago, I started to suspect something was wrong. Sophie had been coming home later and later, with excuses about work or meetings. But I could tell she was lying. The little things started to add up, the way she avoided my gaze, how she suddenly began dressing up, how distant she had become. I hired a private investigator, Avery Scott, to follow her. The photos and reports he sent me showed Sophie with Megan at a local motel, the kind of place you only visit when you want to hide something. I had kept the envelope with the evidence hidden in a drawer, waiting for the right time to confront her. But now, that moment would never come. The surgeon finally appeared, his face impassive. "Ms. Williams?" he asked. I stood, my heart racing. "How is she?" I whispered. "She's stable," the surgeon said, his voice calm but serious. "The bullet missed her vital organs, but she lost a lot of blood. She's lucky to be alive." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Can I see her?" I asked. "Not yet. She's in recovery, sedated. She should be awake by morning. You can see her then." I nodded, unable to shake the mix of relief and dread. Sophie was alive, but what now? What did this mean for us? The next morning, I returned to the hospital, still unsure of what to expect. The hours had dragged by, but now, with Sophie on the brink of awakening, the entire weight of the situation felt like it was about to crush me. I was led to her room by a nurse, who smiled kindly but didn't say much. She had been kept under sedation overnight to stabilize, but now, with her condition improving, Sophie was slowly waking up. I took a deep breath as I pushed the door open. There she was, lying in the hospital bed, her face pale but her eyes fluttering open. "Sophie," I whispered, walking closer. She blinked, her gaze still unfocused. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the words didn't come out immediately. I wasn't sure if it was the sedation or the trauma, but her expression seemed distant. Like she didn't fully understand where she was or why. "Sophie, it's me," I said again, my voice shaky. She looked at me for a moment longer, confusion in her eyes. Then, recognition seemed to register, though her face didn't show the warmth I had been hoping for. "Sarah," she murmured, her voice hoarse. I sat down beside the bed, trying to keep my composure. Seeing her like this, broken, vulnerable, was a harsh reminder of how far we had drifted. My emotions were all over the place. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, and yet, there was something in me that still cared. I couldn't deny it. "Sophie, you're going to be okay," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "The doctors say you'll recover." She nodded slightly, her lips trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as though the words were forced from her. I flinched at the apology. The pain was still too raw, and I wasn't sure how to handle her confession. "Sorry for what, Sophie?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "For getting caught. For putting your life and mine on the line." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she turned her face toward the pillow, as if trying to hide from me. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, the words escaping between sobs. I didn't know how to stop myself from making the worst mistake of my life. The truth was, I wasn't sure I could hear her excuse. Every part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers for what had happened. But I didn't want to be that person, not in this moment. "Who is she, Sophie?" I finally asked, unable to keep the question inside. "The other woman. Megan." I could barely say her name without the sting of jealousy and rage creeping up on me. Sophie's chest heaved with another sob, and she wiped her eyes before looking at me, almost pleadingly. She was just someone I met. I thought it would be a way to escape, to feel alive again. But it spiraled out of control. I nodded, feeling the pit in my stomach deepen. "And then you chose her over us." My voice cracked with the weight of the question. Sophie didn't respond immediately. She closed her eyes and shook her head, as if she couldn't bring herself to face me. "I never stopped loving you, Sarah," she whispered, her voice broken. "But I lost myself, and when I realized what I'd done, it was too late." I didn't know how to respond. Her words were just that, words. And words felt empty in the face of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the violence that had followed. It was too much to process in one sitting. "What happens now, Sophie?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. Sophie didn't look up immediately. She stared at her hands, which were resting on the blanket, as though they were the only things she could control in that moment. After a few moments of silence, she looked at me, her expression filled with regret. "I don't know," she said, barely above a whisper. "But I want to try, if you'll let me. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to make things right. I want to make this right, with you." My heart twisted. I knew what I wanted to say. I wanted to tell her that she had broken me, that everything we had was now tainted. But I also knew that forgiveness wasn't something I could just give away. "Not yet. Maybe," I whispered, standing up slowly. "Maybe we can talk about that once you're better." Sophie's face softened, but the pain was still there, visible in her eyes. "I understand. I'll wait." As I walked out of her room, the weight of the situation felt even heavier. Part of me wanted to run far away from all of this, but the other part, the part that still loved her, wanted to stay and fight for what we once had. But I didn't know if it was even possible. Could I forgive her? Could I rebuild what was broken? Could we ever get back to the way we were? The following weeks were an agonizing blur of uncertainty. Sophie's recovery progressed slowly, but it wasn't just her physical wounds that needed healing, it was the emotional wreckage left in the wake of her actions. Every day I went to visit her at the hospital, hoping for something, anything, that would give me a sign that we could rebuild. But each visit left me feeling more conflicted than the last. Sophie was trying. She was doing everything she could to show me she was sorry. She'd apologize over and over, sending me small messages, asking for forgiveness. But the words felt empty. The apology felt too late, and my anger was still too fresh. The tension between us became unbearable. I couldn't stop myself from thinking about the moment when everything fell apart, when I found out about Megan. The betrayal gnawed at me constantly, and the question lingered, could I ever trust her again? One day, I decided to meet with Megan. I had avoided it for so long, not wanting to give her any more space in my life than she already occupied. But I needed answers. I needed to understand the woman who had taken my place. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop called The Nook, nestled in a quiet corner of downtown. It was a peaceful, cozy place, the kind of cafe that felt like a sanctuary from the world. Megan was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived. She was exactly as I had imagined her, tall, blonde, confident in a way that rubbed me the wrong way. But as I approached her, I couldn't ignore the slight tremor in her hand, the unease in her posture. She wasn't the confident woman I thought she was. "Sarah," she said, standing up as I reached the table. Her voice was steady, but I could tell she was nervous. I didn't offer a handshake. I sat down across from her, my eyes hard. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice icy. Megan seemed to hesitate for a moment, looking down at her hands, before meeting my gaze. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice quieter now. "But I didn't realize how much it would affect everyone. It started off as a mistake. A stupid mistake. And then I got caught up in it." I could feel my pulse quicken at her words. "A mistake," I repeated, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Do you honestly think that what you did was just a mistake?" Her face flushed, and she looked away for a moment, as if struggling to find the right words. "No," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't." But by the time I realized that, it was already too late. I stared at her, the betrayal bubbling up once again. "You knew, then," I said. "You knew it was wrong, and you kept going." Megan didn't respond right away. Her gaze shifted nervously, and she looked down at the table. "I didn't expect any of this to happen," she said, her voice quieter now. "I never wanted to hurt you. But Sophie and we didn't plan it this way." I could see the remorse in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough. "You both ruined my life," I said, feeling the tears welling up. "I thought I knew her. I thought I had everything. And you stole that from me." Megan reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. "Please," she said softly. "I'm sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen." But her apology felt like a lie. And in that moment, I realized that even if Sophie and I could somehow rebuild what was broken, Megan would always be a shadow in our lives, an unforgivable part of the story. After my conversation with Megan, I didn't know what to feel anymore. I was numb, angry, yes, but also unsure of what my next move should be. I hadn't expected any kind of closure from her, but there was still this hollow space inside me, a void where trust and love had once lived. Sophie had already broken that trust, and now Megan had added to it. The weight of everything was crushing. The days that followed were filled with confusion. Sophie reached out to me again and again, begging for another chance, but I couldn't bring myself to answer her calls. I wasn't sure I even knew who she was anymore. The person I had fallen in love with, the woman who promised me forever, felt like a stranger. It was on a Friday evening, 2 weeks after the meeting with Megan, that Sophie showed up at my doorstep. I had been avoiding her, but she didn't seem to care. She stood there, looking fragile, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "Sarah, please. I just need to talk," she said, her voice desperate. I didn't move. I couldn't. "You don't need to say anything," I replied, my voice cold. "You said it all already. You betrayed me. You hurt me in ways I can't even put into words." "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. But I love you, Sarah. I always have. Please, don't let this destroy us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion in her eyes. The shame. I had always known Sophie was a good person, but somewhere along the way, we had both lost our way. I wanted to believe her, wanted to reach out and tell her that we could work through this. But the wound was too deep. "Love isn't enough anymore," I said softly. "You broke everything. Trust isn't something you can just get back with a few words." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, silent, as if waiting for some miracle to happen. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the person who believed in fairy tales or second chances. Not after everything. "I have to go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I closed the door slowly, feeling a weight lift off my chest, but also a new kind of heaviness settling in my heart. For the next few days, I didn't hear from Sophie. The silence between us felt suffocating, but at the same time, it gave me space to think. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me, but I knew I needed to heal by myself. I needed to find who I was without her. And then, 2 weeks later, I got an unexpected message from Sophie. It was simple, just a few words. "I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me one day. But I understand if you can't." I didn't know what to do with it. It was clear that Sophie wasn't giving up, but I wasn't ready to let her back into my life, not yet. I didn't know if I ever would be. The days turned into weeks, and I tried to move forward. It wasn't easy, not at all. I filled my time with work, spending long hours at the coffee shop, hoping the busyness would drown out the constant thoughts of Sophie. But it didn't. She was everywhere, in the corners of my mind, in the music I played, in the silence of my apartment. It was a month after Sophie's message that I finally felt like I was starting to rebuild. I had reconnected with old friends, spent time reflecting on my past, and begun to understand what I truly needed from a relationship. But still, there was that hollow space, a quiet ache that wouldn't go away. One evening, as I was leaving the cafe, I ran into Megan again. She was sitting at one of the tables near the window, her face drawn with exhaustion, her eyes distant. At first, I didn't know whether to approach her. We hadn't spoken since that awful meeting, and I didn't know what kind of reception I'd get. But she looked up as I hesitated, her expression softening. "Sarah," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I nodded, though my heart was pounding. I had so many questions, but I wasn't sure I was ready for answers. Megan stood up, her hands trembling as she held her purse. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she began, her voice uncertain. "And I realize I hurt you, too. Not just by what I did to you, but by my silence. I should have told you what I knew. You deserved that." I studied her face, looking for any sign that she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. But all I saw was regret. "Megan," I said, my voice steady but soft. "You didn't have to say anything to me. You're not the one who hurt me the most. That was Sophie. But I'm still angry at you. I feel betrayed by you, too. Megan nodded, looking down at her hands. I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to know, I never meant for it to go that far. I'm not proud of what I did, and I'll carry that guilt with me forever. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I sat there, processing her words. I had never expected an apology from Megan, especially after everything that had happened. But hearing her say it, hearing the sincerity in her voice, made me realize something. I didn't need her apology to heal. I needed to forgive myself. I took a deep breath and looked up at her. I don't know if I can forgive you, Megan, I said. But I'm learning how to forgive myself. And I think that's the only way I'll ever heal from all of this. She nodded again, her eyes filled with tears. I understand. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am, Sarah. And if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. I didn't know what the future held, or whether Megan and I could ever rebuild what we once had. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about moving forward, finding peace, and learning to trust myself again. As I left the cafe that night, I felt lighter, freer. The weight that had been pressing on me for so long wasn't gone, but it was easier to breathe. I had faced the people who had hurt me. I had confronted the past, and now, I was ready to step into the future. But little did I know, life still had one more twist in store for me. It wasn't long after my conversation with Megan that I got a call from Sophie. I'd been avoiding her for weeks, trying to move on from everything that had happened. But now, hearing her voice on the other end of the line, I felt a mixture of dread and curiosity. Sarah, Sophie's voice was tentative, almost fragile. Can we talk? I know I've hurt you, but I need to explain. I owe you that much. I hesitated, standing at the window of my apartment, looking out over the city. Everything inside me screamed to hang up, to continue pretending that she didn't exist. But I knew that I would never have closure unless I faced her. Fine, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Where do you want to meet? We agreed to meet at a small cafe called Crescent Moon, a quiet little spot that was tucked away in the heart of the city. I'd always loved the place, the dim lighting, the aroma of fresh coffee, and the soft jazz playing in the background. It felt like a refuge, a place where the world outside could disappear for a while. When I walked in, I spotted Sophie right away. She was sitting in the far corner, her face pale, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She looked so different, more fragile, like a version of herself I hadn't seen in years. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She was still my sister, after all, despite everything that had happened. I walked over, taking the seat across from her. Sophie's eyes lifted to meet mine, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I used to know, the sister who had always been there for me, the person I could trust. But it quickly faded, replaced by the woman I had learned to resent. Sarah, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I know I've betrayed you, but I need you to understand why I did it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. The anger that had been simmering inside me for weeks was now boiling over. I had to fight to keep my voice steady. Why? Why did you have to do this to me, Sophie? We've been through so much together, and you— Stop, she interrupted, her hands clenching around her coffee cup. I don't want to make excuses, but I was lost, Sarah. I've been lost for a long time, and I thought— She broke off, taking a shaky breath. I thought that being with Meg would fill something inside me that had been empty for so long. But it didn't, and now look where we are. Her confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to yell, to scream at her for what she had done, but I didn't. Instead, I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us. You could have come to me, I said quietly. I would have helped you. But instead, you hurt me. You hurt us both. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, and I could see the guilt weighing on her. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough to erase what had happened. I never meant to hurt you, Sarah. I was just weak. Her voice cracked as she said it, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Do you think I can just forget this? I asked, my words coming out sharper than I intended. Do you think I can just pretend it didn't happen? You betrayed me, Sophie. You and Meg, both of you. And now you want me to fix this? To make it better? Sophie looked down at the table, her face crumpling with regret. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I leaned back in my chair, my mind spinning. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Sophie, if I could ever trust her again. But the one thing I did know was that I couldn't keep living in the past, couldn't keep carrying this weight on my shoulders. The conversation lingered in the air, unresolved, heavy with emotions neither of us could quite put into words. I watched Sophie, waiting for her to say something else, anything that might make the situation clearer, but she stayed silent, her gaze fixed on her coffee. I took a deep breath, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger. Hurt. A quiet, gnawing sadness. I don't know how to move forward from this, I admitted, my voice softer now. I want to, but I don't know if I can. Sophie nodded, her lips trembling. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Sarah. I don't even expect you to forgive me at all. I just needed to tell you the truth. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. It was more than I had expected. And yet, it didn't feel like enough. I had always trusted Sophie, believed that no matter what happened, we would be there for each other. But now, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure of whether I should let go or pull myself back from the fall. I just don't understand, I muttered. Why Meg? Why her of all people? Sophie shifted in her seat, her eyes flashing with a mixture of shame and frustration. I don't know, she said, shaking her head. I guess I thought maybe it was easier to feel something for someone who wasn't you. Maybe I was trying to escape. Escape? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. From me? She winced, but then nodded. From everything. From the pressure. From the expectations. From the life I thought I was supposed to have. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the flood of anger that surged through me. You could have talked to me, Sophie. I could have helped. We could have figured this out together. Instead, you chose to betray me. I know, she whispered, her voice small. I'm so sorry. I stared at her, unsure of what to say next. We both knew that words alone couldn't fix this. It wasn't that simple. And then, just as I thought the conversation was going to drift back into silence, Sophie looked up at me with a sudden intensity. Sarah, there's one more thing I need to tell you. I felt my heart skip a beat. What is it? She hesitated, her eyes searching mine as if she were trying to gauge my reaction. Meg and we're over. We ended things a few days ago. My stomach twisted at the news, and a knot formed in my throat. What? I whispered, not sure if I was relieved or confused by her admission. Why now? Sophie's voice was barely audible. Because I realized something. I don't need her. I never did. I just wanted to fill a hole inside me, and I thought she could do that. But the truth is, I was only running away from myself. I couldn't process it. The words didn't make sense in my head. But what struck me the most was the raw vulnerability in her voice. Sophie was broken. And for the first time, I realized just how much of that brokenness I hadn't seen. But was I willing to help her pick up the pieces? Was I willing to try and rebuild what we once had? The silence stretched between us, heavy and loaded with the weight of everything unsaid. I could feel my heart racing, trying to process the enormity of what Sophie had just shared with me. A part of me wanted to forgive her instantly, to throw my arms around her and tell her that it was all going to be okay. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, wanted to lash out, to make her feel the pain she had caused. I took another deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. So, what does this mean for us, Sophie? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She blinked, looking at me with a mixture of hope and fear. I don't know, she said softly. But I want to try, Sarah. I want to fix this. If you'll let me. I felt my chest tighten. Could I really let her in again? Could I let go of the hurt, the betrayal, and trust her? I didn't know. You know, Sophie, I said, my voice unsteady, I don't know if I can forgive you just yet. It's going to take time. And I'm not sure if we can go back to what we had before. Her eyes searched mine, and I saw the vulnerability there, the fear of losing me forever. I understand, she whispered. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for that kind of promise. It felt like a weight I wasn't sure I could bear. Just then, the door of the cafe opened, and a woman stepped inside. Her presence seemed to cut through the tension in the air, her gaze immediately falling on us. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. Sophie stiffened beside me, and I noticed a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She quickly turned her attention back to me, trying to hide the unease on her face. The woman took a few steps toward our table, and before I could react, she spoke. Sarah. Sophie. I looked up, confused. Yes. Do we know you? The woman smiled, but it was a tight, knowing smile. I'm Rachel. I work with Meg. I heard about what happened. Sophie's face drained of color, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening. Rachel's eyes flicked from Sophie to me, a look of pity in her gaze. I'm sorry to intrude, she said softly, but I think we need to talk. I felt the room grow colder with Rachel's words hanging in the air. The look between Sophie and Rachel was loaded with unspoken tension, and I couldn't help but feel a knot form in my stomach. Who was this woman? And why did Sophie look so uncomfortable? Sophie cleared her throat, trying to steady her voice. Rachel, what's going on? She asked, her eyes not meeting mine. Rachel's gaze remained fixed on Sophie for a moment before she turned to me, her expression shifting into something more sympathetic. I think you deserve to know the truth, Sarah. About everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped a beat. What was she talking about? I had already been through enough pain, and now this woman, a stranger to me, was talking as if she knew something that could change everything. My mind raced. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. What truth? Rachel took a deep breath, glancing at Sophie before answering. I'm not sure how to say this, but Meg, she's been keeping something from you. Sophie's head snapped up at the mention of Meg's name, her expression a mix of shock and guilt. What do you mean, Rachel? Sophie asked, her voice strained. Rachel's eyes met mine, filled with a sadness I couldn't quite place. There's more to Meg's involvement in your marriage than you think, she said slowly. Things that you haven't been told. The words felt like a punch to the gut. I had already felt the sting of betrayal from Sophie, but now it seemed there was more. What was Rachel talking about? My mind reeled as I looked from Rachel to Sophie, trying to piece together what was happening. Sophie finally spoke, her voice barely audible. Please, don't do this, Rachel. Rachel ignored her plea, her gaze still fixed on me. I think you deserve to know, Sarah. You've been lied to. And the truth might hurt, but you have a right to it. I glanced at Sophie, feeling a mixture of disbelief and anger. Sophie, is this true? Is there something you haven't told me about Meg? Sophie's face twisted in pain, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out, but I pulled away, needing space to process what was happening. I didn't want you to know, Sophie said, her voice cracking. It's complicated. And I was trying to protect you. Protect me? I asked, my voice rising. From what? More lies. Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them to meet my gaze. Meg, she was the one who convinced me to keep quiet about the affair. She didn't want you to know. She didn't want you to leave Tom. My heart was pounding as Sophie's words sank in. I felt a rush of confusion, anger, and betrayal flooding through me all at once. The woman I thought I could trust, the one who was supposed to be my best friend, had been hiding something so huge from me. And not only that, she had been influenced by Meg, the very person who had hurt me so much. I can't believe this, I whispered, the weight of her confession making it hard to breathe. Why would you protect someone like Meg? After everything she did to me, to our friendship. Sophie looked like she might crumble under the weight of my gaze, her eyes welling up with tears. I didn't know what else to do. Meg was so convincing. She made me believe that you couldn't handle the truth. She said that you'd forgive Tom and it would all just go away. That we could all move on. I wanted to believe that too, Sarah. I really did. I shook my head in disbelief. So you kept lying to me. For how long? Since the day you found out about Tom and Meg, Sophie said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to hurt you more, but I see now that I've only made everything worse. I felt the ground shift beneath me. My anger was rising, but so was my hurt. I had trusted Sophie with everything, and now it seemed like my world was crumbling before my eyes. I didn't know who I could trust anymore, and it terrified me. Rachel, still standing across from us, seemed to sense the intensity of the moment. I think you deserve to know everything, Sarah. You're stronger than you think. I turned to Rachel, my frustration growing. What do you mean by that? What exactly do you know? Rachel hesitated for a moment, then spoke with a calmness that felt out of place given the chaos around us. I know that Sophie wasn't the only one Meg manipulated. There were others involved, people you don't even know yet. Meg had a plan, and she wasn't going to stop until she made sure you stayed in the dark. I turned back to Sophie, my heart racing. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you let her control you? Sophie's face twisted with guilt, and she looked like she was about to break. I was scared, Sarah. I didn't know how to tell you the truth, and I thought I could protect you by hiding it. But now I see. I see how much worse I've made everything. Rachel stepped forward then, her expression softening. It's not too late. You can still fix this, Sophie. You can tell Sarah everything. It's the only way for her to truly heal. I turned my gaze to Sophie, my anger simmering but mixed with a deep sorrow. Is it too late, Sophie? Can we fix this? Sophie's tears spilled over as she finally nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I should have never kept this from you. I never wanted to hurt you. As the weight of the situation pressed down on us, I felt a mix of relief and despair. The truth was finally out there, but it came at a cost. My friendship with Sophie, the one person I thought I could always rely on, was shattered. I couldn't unhear the words she had said, couldn't forget the hurt they caused. But despite the pain, I knew I had to make a decision about what came next. Sophie, I started, my voice trembling, I need some time. I don't know if I can forgive you right now. This changes everything. Sophie's face crumpled as she stepped closer, her eyes pleading with me. I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I need you to know that I'm truly sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I looked away, my mind swirling with everything that had happened. I needed to think. I couldn't make a decision in this moment of turmoil. Rachel, sensing my need for space, gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Take your time, Sarah. This is a lot to process. But don't let anyone rush you. I nodded, appreciating Rachel's calm presence. For the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone in this. Sophie had betrayed me, yes, but Rachel was right there beside me, unwavering. As I turned and walked away from the cafe, I knew things would never be the same. The betrayal had left a permanent mark on my heart, but I also knew that I was stronger than I had been before. With time, I would heal. Whether Sophie and I could rebuild our friendship, I didn't know. But I wasn't going to let this define me. And somewhere deep inside, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Not just a new chapter, but a whole new book. One where I was in control, where I could trust again, and where I would never let anyone take away my peace.